your patients know what presbyopia is?
There are people who are afraid of the press.
Have you talked to your patients about multifocal contact lenses?
I've heard the bifocal, but not multifocal.
Exactly, not multifocal.
Do you need help with your multifocal strategy? Learn more at the conclusion of this episode.
Your eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with Micromicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and Micromicelle technology.
With more screen usage and indoor time, myopia, also known as nearsightedness, is increasing and getting worse in children. Now, certified eye doctors can prescribe MiSight One Day, the first and only FDA-approved soft contact lens to slow myopia progression in age-appropriate children. Visit CooperVision.com to find a Brilliant Futures certified eye doctor near you. Good morning, I'm Dr. Kerry Gelb, and welcome to Wellness 1280 on Open Your Eyes Radio. Please listen as I discuss the newest information in the world of health, nutrition, and sports every Saturday morning, 6 a.m. Central Time on AM 1280 The Patriot. Also, please share your thoughts by emailing me at drkerrygelb@gmail.com. That's drkerrygelb@gmail.com. And visit my new website, wellness1280.com, where we have all guest links, Wellness 1280 info, previous shows. Wellness is taking over the Patriot Airways for the next hour. Sit back and enjoy my conversation with psychologist Dr. Stephen Sideroff. According to the American Institute of Stress, 77% of Americans experience stress that impacts their physical health, and 73% feel stress that impacts their mental health. Yet, according to a Gallup poll, only 23% of American adults report visiting a mental health professional within the past year. Our guest today, Dr. Stephen Sideroff, an expert in helping people overcome stress. Dr. Sideroff is a professor at the UCLA Geffen School of Medicine, a clinical psychologist, consultant, researcher, and author whose groundbreaking work has empowered countless individuals to build stronger and more adaptive minds and bodies. In his book, The 9 Pillars of Resilience, Dr. Sideroff offers a comprehensive roadmap for navigating life's challenges with grace and strength. From emotional balance to physical health, these pillars form a foundation for living a resilient life in today's fast-paced world. Today, Dr. Sideroff will share these pillars with us and guide us in cultivating resilience in our daily lives. So whether we're facing stress, adversity, or simply looking to enhance our well-being, this episode is packed with valuable insights you won't want to miss. Dr. Sideroff, welcome to Wellness 1280 on Open Your Eyes Radio with Dr. Kerry Gelb.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gelb. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Dr. Sideroff, I read your book, and it's a book everybody should have. It's 400 pages, but you don't have to read the whole thing at one time. You can read bits and pieces. And I've taken bits and pieces out, and toward the end of the book, and it was pillar 2, I believe, is having a better relationship with others. You talked about the Gman Ratio for a good relationship, and I've been fascinated with that Gman Ratio. Can you explain to the audience the Gman Ratio, how I could get along better with my wife, and my producer, Melissa, could get along better with her husband, my friend Joel?
Sure, and it's a good place as any to start. And John Gottman is a psychologist at the University of Washington. He spent years studying couples. And he actually has a laboratory that is an apartment, and couples would go there and spend a few days there with cameras in every room. So he's able to monitor their interactions. And one of the primary findings that he made was that healthy relationships have a ratio of 20-1 positive to negative interactions. And when that ratio drops down to about 5-1, the relationship is in trouble. And so I've taken that finding and I've applied it in my own work, first to our relationship with ourselves, and then to our relationship with others as he does. And so I ask people to monitor their internal dialogue. How do they talk to themselves? And ask them to monitor and determine, are they at 20-1 positive to negative, or perhaps 5-1? Well, what I find with many of us, in fact, our ratios are more 1-5 positive to negative. In other words, a lot of us have a relationship with ourselves in which we do not treat ourselves as good as we should be. And then I apply it in pillar number 2 to relationship with others, so that we start to notice what is the quality of our relationships. So the goal is to spend more time with people in which we have this 20-1 relationship, and discriminate and spend less time with people who can be judgmental, critical, because our environment is very important in terms of whether we stay in a place of resilience and balance. If we are in relationships where we have to be on guard, we have to worry about what the other person is thinking, that's going to trigger our stress response. On the other hand, if we're in relationships where we feel safe and comfortable, we can let down our guard. And in those relationships, we get what I refer to as emotional nourishment. And so in pillar 2, you want to be making sure you're in relationships, in environments in which you are getting emotional nourishment and not having to put your guard up as much as possible.
You know, since I've read your book, I've been trying to practice that with my wife. And I've been saying very positive things and trying to do positive things. And I have to tell you, it really works. It's really helped my relationship with my wife. And I've used it with my kids, and I've used it with my employees as well. And I think it helps with everything. Now, you brought up an interesting point. There are certain people that are negative Normans. Whenever you're around them, they're so negative. Do you have, as a psychologist, somebody who's thought about this for many, many years, why are some people so negative?
Well, that's a very good question. And our style develops out of our lessons of childhood. And so we learn how to be in the world based on our little home environment growing up. We don't, as a child, we don't go out and sample hundreds of families to see what's the best way to be. We assume that small world that we grow up in is representative of the larger world, even though it isn't. And so unconsciously, we adapt to the lessons of our family, of our parents. We model their behavior. And if they're negative toward us, that's what we learn, and that's how we learn to be. And that's how we learn to be toward ourselves. And when we grow up and become adults, we don't go, oh, okay, let me try a different way. We continue in that pattern because we simply assume it's the right way to be. We don't know any better. And most importantly, our brain literally develops neural circuitry based on those lessons. So we have an internal voice that can be negative, critical, and judgmental. And the way I train people to address this is to give them the qualities of a healthy internal parent. And the qualities of a healthy internal parent are love, coming from a place of love, compassion, acceptance, support, and care.
You know, a lot of people are in a relationship where their spouse nags. Why does somebody nag constantly?
Well, again, if you're growing up in an environment where that's something that you learn, it's normal and automatic for you to do it in your adult life and with the people you're with. because you think that's the normal way. You don't consciously think it. You just follow the way you were taught. And that's why one of my keys to resilience is a growth mindset, pillar number 5. And that's realizing that there's some lessons that you've learned that you have to learn differently as an adult.
And how about facial expressions? How important are they?
You know, it's interesting about facial expressions because they transmit what's going on inside of us, and we unconsciously pick up those signals. So someone that has a frown, we think, oh, there must be something wrong. Maybe I did something wrong. If someone has a smile, it makes us feel more safe and more comfortable. And this projection of our facial expression, the tone of our voice, is embedded in our evolutionary process. It's automatic. And so it's very important that we notice how we speak and how we approach other people, because it has an unconscious impact on others.
You know, in your book, there was a great quote. I love this quote by Maya Angelou, who is an American author, poet, I guess an activist as well. And what Maya said was that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they won't forget how you made them feel. Please go into that in a little detail.
Yeah, absolutely. And that quote comes from my 6th pillar, which is emotional balance and mastery. And, you know, a lot of times, particularly in our childhood, where we're not allowed or we don't feel safe enough to express all of our feelings, feelings don't go away on their own. And if they're not addressed, they get pushed down and they're staying there and they have energy to them. Emotions, in fact, motion is the root of emotion. And so we have this energy inside of ourselves that we've pushed down. And I believe that a lot of depression comes from people pushing down their emotions and literally creating holding patterns in our body. When you create holding patterns, it interferes with the flow of energy in your body. So it not only creates depression, but it also interferes with feeling positive emotions such as joy that require a full expression of your body. And so what's very important is to be aware of your emotional unfinished business. A lot of us carry these feelings of resentment, of anger, of sadness, and it's very important to pay attention, notice what they are, and work toward resolving these unfinished feelings, unfinished business. Sometimes we have them from feelings from childhood. Sometimes they're from yesterday or last month. And in my book, I go through a regular process of how you go through the process of experiencing, expressing, and then letting go of those feelings. Even if it's with someone who's no longer in your life, those feelings still need to be addressed. And so when you numb your feelings, it's very difficult to be fully expressive with other people. And that's what really makes connections between us and others, is how we feel toward each other.
Now, talk to me about the concept of toxic people and removing them from your life. Is it something that you should do? Will it make you better? Someone who every time you're around them, they're going to criticize whatever you say. They're going to argue with you about every word that you have to say. And when does it come to a point where it's time to say, look, this toxic person, I have to remove them from my life, so I worry about myself and not trying to please this person anymore?
Well, that's a very good question. And we come across people like this throughout our lives. And when we have a choice, it's always better to choose people who are more loving and caring versus people who could be critical and toxic. But sometimes we don't have the choice. You know, I say to people in my audience to discriminate those who are, say, toxic versus those who are healthy. And I get a chuckle in the audience because sometimes that person could be their mother, father, or somebody who they can't get away from, their boss. with someone that they work with. So first is to try and limit those interactions, those relationships. But when you can't, it's still important for a person to set a psychological boundary. And by that, I mean, I realize that person is negative, but I'm not going to let myself be affected by their judgments, their criticism. And I'm going to set this psychological boundary where those comments bounce off of that boundary that I set and go back to them. And so it's always our responsibility. Sometimes it means saying no to somebody when they're asking for something that really doesn't feel right to us. And a lot of times in my practice and with clients, I have to help them be strong enough to be able to say, no, I'm not going to allow you to talk to me that way. So this is very important. We want to limit the time with people who are toxic, negative. And when we're not able to, the first step is to give them feedback. Let them know how you feel and see if they listen and make adjustments, which would be ideal. And if they don't make the adjustments, then you either make sure you set that boundary or you limit your time with that person.
And in your book, you talk about relationships, little strategies that you could do, and you just kind of touched on it a little bit that make you feel uncomfortable. The I statements. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Certainly in relationships, a lot of times we will be accusatory when we're upset about something that someone else did or said. And it's very important that if you're really wanting to give feedback that may create change in the other person, feedback that you want them to hear, if you're accusatory, they're going to become defensive and they're going to be less likely to hear what you have to say, and they're going to try and defend themselves. So what I always encourage people to do is to use I statements. This is when you do this, this is how it makes me feel. Now, the other person can't argue with your feelings. If you talk about you did this wrong, they can argue about that. But when you say, it made me feel, I felt hurt when you said that, they can't argue with your feelings. Feelings are subjective, and we all have a right to our own subjective feelings. And the other important part here is if you have a feeling, it's important to remember there isn't any right or wrong with feelings. You have that right to feel whatever you feel in a situation. So by feeling like I have that right, I can have a more solid position to stand on, but I still want to come from, this is how I feel when you say this or that.
And you also have guidelines for a good relationship. If you could talk about some of those guidelines that you have in your book.
Yes. And, earlier I talked about the qualities of a healthy internal parent, coming from a place of love, acceptance, compassion, support, care, and joy. Well, those are the guidelines for a healthy relationship as well. And it's sort of like the golden rule where you want to treat other people the way you would like them to treat yourself. And so I'm going to treat people from this positive, loving, caring, supportive way where my goal is for that person to be successful, that person to feel good. And if I have those as my intentions, I'm going to talk and speak in a really good manner that supports both of us and the relationship.
And you talk about creating safe zones. Tell me what that is.
Yes. So I invite you to think about, and your audience to think about their day. And if you kind of go through your day, you'll realize that your day is a succession of handling stressful situations. It could be a relationship, there's a conflict. It could be a deadline. It could be worrying about paying a bill. But we go through our days going from one situation to another in which we activate our stress response. Now, we don't have unlimited amounts of energy. And every time we have a stressful situation, we activate and mobilize our bodies. So every cell in our body acts as a little company in and of itself, a device to produce energy, a machine to produce energy. And we can use up the resources of our bodies by going from one stress to another, activating the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. So we have to find opportunities to recover the resources and energy of our body. And that's by going into this parasympathetic recovery mode. But if you think about your day, a lot of stimuli trigger stress, but how many trigger safety, relaxation? If you're like me, there are really no times in the day that will automatically do that. So we have to create them. We have to look for zones of safety, times and places in our day, in our lives, in which we could say, I'm safe, I could let down my guard. And I encourage people at the very least when they sit down for a meal, for lunch, dinner, to remind themselves, while I'm eating, I'm safe, I could let down my guard, which also turns out to be good for the digestive process as well.
And if we move to parenting tips, you have some parenting tips in the book, how to talk to your kids to have a better relationship with your kids. Now, I know that being a parent of a 5-year-old is different than being a parent of a 10-year-old, even though I'm not changing much. The kid is changing, and then a parent of a 15-year-old and a parent of a 20-year-old and then a parent of an adult. But if you give some parenting tips of a young child, and then as they get older, rather than to say, well, don't do that, don't do this, there are better ways to talk to them.
Well, yes, I really advise people to look more for the positive behaviors of your child that you can reinforce, and encouraging them to do more of those rather than to be judgmental, critical, and negative. In fact, I encourage people not to be judgmental and critical, because children learn to treat themselves based on how their parent is treating them. So you want to set boundaries on your children, but you want those boundaries to be wide enough.
We're speaking with Dr. Stephen Sideroff, psychologist. His book, The 9 Pillars of Resilience, The Proven Path to Master Stress, Slow Aging, and Increase Vitality. This is Dr. Kerry Gelb. You're listening to Wellness 1280 on Open Your Eyes Radio.
MacuHealth, your science-born and tested solutions for visual performance, macular degeneration, and dry eye syndrome. New products coming soon. Embrace the science.
We're back with Dr. Stephen Sideroff, internationally renowned psychologist, professor at the UCLA Geffen School of Medicine. His book, The 9 Pillars of Resilience. And we're talking about parenting tips that anybody that has kids, we all need parenting tips. We're talking about dealing with 5-year-olds, being a parent of a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old, college age, and even a 30-year-old. So help us with that, Dr. Sideroff.
Right. So the most important thing when you're raising a child is for them to feel loved. When a child feels like they are loved and accepted and validated by their parents, it makes it more difficult for a parent to go wrong. So I want to start with that lesson. And what's important when you have to criticize, when you have to tell a child that they're doing wrong, you want to be very careful that you let them know that their behavior was wrong, that they are not wrong. You want to make that distinction, because a lot of children will automatically feel there's something wrong with me. So you can criticize a particular behavior, but you want to be careful that it's not, you're stupid, you want, well, first of all, you want to avoid all name calling completely. As a child gets older, one of the keys to being able to communicate in a way that the child is open to hear what you have to say is always to start out with something that connects you with the child. If you start off by complimenting them or letting them know that you love them, and then you follow with something that of their behavior that you felt is not appropriate, they're more able to hear you than if you just start off criticizing. So again, it's always the relationship is what's most important. And if you nurture a loving, healthy relationship, the child is going to be more open to hearing what you have to say. So again, back to the keys, it's letting them know that you love them for who they are, that they don't have to be produced more and more as the requirement for loving them, that you encourage that and you want them to be successful, but again, that's separate from whether you love them or not. So those are some keys in parenting.
And how about today, the helicopter parent? How does that affect a child?
So by the helicopter parent, you're referring to one hovering over them, watching them very carefully. And you have to be careful about the unspoken messages that are conveyed by your behavior. And when you're hypervigilant of a child, overly into their lives, hovering over them, you're giving them a message that you don't trust them. You're giving them a message that you don't think they know what or how to do to do things. So you have to be there watching over them. And so again, when we set boundaries, we want to set those boundaries wide enough to allow children to experiment, explore, learn from their mistakes. But you set the boundaries so that they can't make big mistakes that can hurt them in the long run.
And how do you deal with suggestions to kids where, they're sitting around, they don't have anything to do? Why don't you call John? Why don't you call Mike, get together, go do this activity, do that activity? And they don't know, I just want to be by myself. And what's a good way to do that?
So if they say, I just want to be by myself, that needs to be respected unless it's happening all the time. So, there has to be some flexibility in approach, which is my 8th pillar of resilience, flexibility. And rather than give suggestions to your child, I encourage parents to find more creative ways to elicit options from your child so that you're giving them input that kind of inspires them to come up with their own ideas. And then only after nothing happens from that approach, you can come in with some suggestions.
And how about over complimenting or complimenting, saying you're so smart rather than say, try your best?
I think compliments are very important. In fact, as adults, I find that many of us have difficulty taking in compliments, even when they're given to us. So I think it's important to compliment and to acknowledge successful behavior, good behavior, positive behavior. But you don't want to be doing it all the time where it devalues the compliment, where the child says, I get up out of bed and my mother's or father's saying, great for getting out of bed. It diminishes the impact of the compliment. So you want to make sure you give compliments, but you want to make sure you're giving it for appropriate behavior.
And how about parents giving their power to their kids or not feeling enough power?
Well, this is an important issue that you're bringing up because many parents are insecure in their own power. And so they try to exert that power overly over their children. when children get to the age of becoming adults, teenagers and becoming adults, one of the important functions that I find of parents is finding a healthy way for what I refer to as transfer of power. You want to encourage, invite, and permit children to become more and more powerful as they become adults. You know, older societies, more primitive cultures, indigenous cultures usually have rituals that teenagers go through to become adults. And it signifies to them the ownership of power, the taking on of power as they become adults. We don't have that really in our culture. So parents of teenagers need to find healthy ways in which they consciously turn over power to their children at the appropriate time and appropriate age.
In your book, you talk about Susan Jackson's book, Flow in Sports, and that growth occurs only when there's a challenge and includes a level of uncertainty. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, this is so important in my concept of resilience, because resilience has been termed the ability to bounce back. And I've created a new concept where resilience is the ability to bounce forward. And by that, I mean, every time you have a stressful encounter, you want to learn the lesson of that encounter so that it grows your capacity and you handle the next stress in your life from a better place, a better position. And so this is how we find our stress sweet spot, by learning the lessons of each stressful encounter so we grow from that experience. And I can give you a particular example that's very relevant and very important if we have time right at this moment.
Yes, please, please.
So a lot of people feel very anxious when they're approaching a stressful situation, anxious, and they worry. And then the stress comes and they do well. They handle it well. Now, they're relieved, but what most people take away from that situation is, not consciously, but I was anxious, I was worried, and things turned out okay. And in our brains, we've put those things together, anxiety, worry, and things turn out okay, instead of the real lesson that needs to be taken away, which is, I'm competent, I handled that stress well, I don't have to worry the next time. I don't have to be anxious the next time. It's the opposite of the message that most people take away from those situations. So that's what I mean by resilience as the ability to bounce forward, is to break away from old patterns, learn new lessons from that experience.
Why do you think some people worry so much? You know, in my family, my grandmother was a terrible worrier. My mother's a terrible worrier. Why do some people worry so much compared to others?
Well, we we really model behavior that our children learn from. Not only do we model behavior, but our nervous system actually develops based on our relationship with our primary caregiver. So if we're a child and we have cramps and we're crying and we're upset, and the mother or the father gets nervous and worried and anxious because of how the baby is, the baby's nervous system learns to tune in and become attuned to that nervous system and develops a nervous system in relation to that. If instead the mother or father is calm, relaxed, the child develops a more calm and relaxed nervous system. So both on a biological, physiological level and on a emotional level, we model behavior of our parents. And so as adults, we don't simply accept that with a growth mindset. We say, I have to learn a better approach and not be so anxious or nervous. And I don't have to be that. I'm doing it because this is how I learned growing up, and I could do it differently now.
we were talking about failure and what to do about failure. Is failure necessarily bad, or could it also be positive?
Well, this goes to the heart of resilience, and that's how you respond to what happens in your life. And again, I go back to my fifth pillar, mental balance and mastery, where one of the keys is having a growth mindset and a positive mindset. So that means if you make a mistake, if you have a failure, rather than giving up, you try and learn from that experience. You mentioned Thomas Edison, and he failed until he succeeded. And we don't have to use the word fail. We could simply use the word feedback from the universe or from the world that lets us know whether we were on the right path or not, because the goal is always to find the right path. It's not to say I can't or I didn't, it's to say I haven't found it yet. And this is at the heart of my fifth pillar. And so I encourage everybody to really take this positive attitude, because it works so much better in becoming more resilient.
I love the quote you have in your book with Thomas Jefferson. I find that the harder I work, the more luck I seem to have. And that makes a lot of sense.
Well, again, this gets to the heart of being resilient. The lessons of our childhood go in very deep because they are survival lessons. And our brain literally develops based on those lessons. That's the conditioning of our nervous system and our brain. And so as adults, we have the other basic capacity of neuroplasticity, which means that we can literally reshape those neural networks. But the key is, as Thomas Jefferson said, hard work. The key is to be persistent and consistent, to set an intention of what you want, and then wake up every morning starting out with that intention, so you address it on a daily basis. Practice makes perfect. Whatever it is that you want to change or do better, it requires continual practice and realizing that little by little, your brain is going to make adjustments. In fact, the interesting thing is we've been talking for about a half hour, 45 minutes. If this conversation is impactful to your audience, it has already started to create changes in your audience's brain, just based on our conversation. That's how powerful neuroplasticity is. A half-hour impactful encounter can begin shifting neural networks in our brain. And if we want to reset our brain and how we do things in our lives, we have to be persistent with it.
I want to ask you about a difficult question. We got about 7 minutes left from somebody who sent me a text dealing with grief and a loss of a child. Recently, I know somebody who lost a child and how to deal with grief. And then how does a person who is to comfort somebody that is dealing with grief and is feeling very uncomfortable to have to see somebody who lost a child, and they know they have to see them to help them in some way, but that's very uncomfortable as well. But of course, nothing like the person who lost a child dealing with grief.
These are very difficult questions and very important questions in life. And what I want to say to everybody out there is one of the most important aspects of resilience is being able to accept what is, being able to accept reality. When you lose somebody or something happens in your life that's very difficult, but you can't change, one of the keys to resolving the grief inside yourself and moving on is coming from a place of acceptance. A lot of us don't want to accept things that are difficult. A lot of us don't want to even accept the feelings that we carry that are uncomfortable. So whether it's our own feelings or the feelings of others, when you come from a place of acceptance, it helps you be more present, which is my seventh pillar of resilience. And when you're more present, you're able to work through your own grief more readily, and you're able to be more present with someone that you're wanting to support who's going through their grief. Acceptance means I can sit here and be uncomfortable with you, and that's the best we could do in this moment. And if you are with somebody and you're present with them and you're holding a sacred space for them, that's the best thing that you can give to a friend or relative that you love. And if you could sit with yourself when you're going through your own difficult issues and simply be present with yourself and not run away, you get through it the best and the fastest. So acceptance is a very key component to resilience.
I want to switch to another topic because that was a very difficult topic. This is a more of a positive topic, dealing with you work with executives who are very successful about being in the zone. Or athletes that say they're being in the zone. Talk to me about what that means and what are some of the key factors you found in very successful executives?
Right. So one of the keys to being in the zone is allowing the flow of your behavior without stepping in and questioning yourself or judging yourself. And with a lot of athletes, I had a tennis player that I worked with who had difficulty not judging himself because that's how his father was pushing him, being critical and judgmental. And one of the biggest steps we took to break away and to improve, to really move to a higher level, was to be more accepting of how he performed. Now, what do I mean by accepting? Well, if I give my best performance, I want to be accepting of that, not critical or judgmental. And so this is true and important for everybody that's listening here. You give your best and then you accept and appreciate that effort that you did rather than being critical and judgmental. Because when you're critical and judgmental, you literally undermine your progress. So I really encourage people to do your best. And then when you do your best, even if you make a mistake, be accepting, because that's the royal road to moving forward in your life.
And talk about, in this case, with being adaptability, being able to adapt.
So adaptability really is at the heart of resilience. And throughout my book, I talk about different aspects of adapting. Adapting means being present to take in the impact of your own behavior and being willing and open to hear what other people have to say. So it's not only that you want other people to hear you when you give them feedback, you want to make sure you're open, which is a quality of resilience, to hear feedback from other people. And if it's coming from a loving place, if it's coming from a supportive place, take it in and use it for your own growth. So again, another very important key to resilience.
You talked about the tennis player. How about the baseball player or tennis player that when they play, they kind of freeze because of a fear of failure? How do they overcome something like that?
Right. So that's the same issue. It starts by recognizing your own internal voice. That's my pillar number one, and very important in life to shift from a voice in which you can be judgmental and critical to a positive, loving voice. Now, many of us grow up thinking that I have to be hard on myself in order to push myself to do better. And my research demonstrates and shows that that's not the best approach. That coming from a more supportive, loving place, you get the best results.
And for a parent, when a child does poorly and the child's upset, what would you recommend the parent do or say?
I recommend they begin with compassion. If a child did something poorly, I guarantee you the child is as upset or more than the parent. So you start with compassion, letting the child know that you love them, even though they made that mistake. Then you can go ahead and work on improvement, but they'll be more open to that improvement if you start off with compassion.
I'm speaking with Dr. Stephen Sideroff. Where can people find out more about you? Where should they go? What websites, etc.?
So my website is drstephensideroff.com, and I have for your audience something very special, my resilience assessment booklet that they can get free, and it describes my 9 pillars, but it also has a questionnaire they can take, self-score, and derive their own resilience profile, showing them their areas of strength and areas needing further growth.
Dr. Stephen Sideroff, psychologist, thank you for joining me on Open Your Eyes Radio with Dr. Kerry Gelb. It was a pleasure.
Your eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with Micromicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and Micromicelle technology. Fitting multifocal contact lenses presents a big opportunity to meet patient needs while growing your practice. Alcon is your partner not only with our innovative portfolio, but through e-learning. Learn to enhance your multifocal strategy today with the Alcon Experience Academy.
OIE Broadcasting is the emerging leader in social media.
We use scientific entertainment to drive more patients into your office.
Visit oiebroadcasting.com and sign up today.